5,000 years ago, Harappan civilization had thriving trade relations with the West, which is established through archaeological evidence across the region: Mesopotamia, Central Asia, the Persian Gulf, and the Indian subcontinent. This vast trade network flourished for almost a millennia and was dominated by Harappan traders, especially the seafaring traders. Namaste and welcome to Indian History and Archaeology. I'm Dr. Lajwanti Shani and I will be starting off this monologue series on Harappan civilization. In the first monologue of this series, I will be presenting an overview of this topic and then dive deeper in the following episodes. So the points of discussion for this presentation will be Harappan trade routes going westward via land and sea, trade network between Mesopotamia, Dilmun, Magan and Meluha, Old World Order and spheres of influence. Contact between Mesopotamia and the Harappan civilization was established with the discovery of Harappa in 1921. In 2021, which is the current year, we're celebrating 100 years of this Indian civilization, which was named after the type site Harappa. It is also known as the Indus Valley Civilization and the Sindhu Saraswati Civilization. For Harappan trade, there is quite a lot of research done in India, Pakistan, Baluchistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and of course Mesopotamia, which connected this large landmass on the overland trade network. Some of the well-known archaeologists who have worked in this vast region include Aurel Stein, largely credited for rediscovering the Silk Road in the early 1800s, but for our interest is his work done in Central Asia. Later on, Dr. Richard Olchin and Mrs. Bridget Olchin had an adventurous career, slipping in and out of the Pashtun region as well as the newly formed India and Pakistan. Professor Gregory Purcell, Nayanjot Lahiri, Shirin Ratnagar, Dilip Chakrabarti, and many others have also helped our understanding of the land trade network. For the sea trade network, there is again a lot of work done by Elizabeth During Caspers, Beatrice Decadi, Professor Maurizio Tossi, Clezu and Mary, Dan Potts, Weisgerber, Crawford, Greg Purcell again, and yours truly. The title of my PhD thesis was Trade and Transport Mechanisms of the Protohistoric Sea Trade between Harappans and Mesopotamia, Fresh Evidence from the Oman Peninsula. The earliest trade began via land route going through Central Asia in the pre-Harappan and early Harappan phases, with the dates for these phases being constantly pushed back with new research data. I'd say this trade would go back to about 4000 BCE or possibly even earlier. That makes it more than 6,000 years before present time. The highlight of this early trade is the prized stone lapis lazuli. This rare precious stone, which became a status symbol in Mesopotamia and Egypt, was traded from Shari Sokta, which is geographically almost the middle point of this entire land route trade network. The only source of lapis lazuli in this region is Saresang Valley in the Badakhshan Mountains in northeast Afghanistan. Interestingly, there is archaeological evidence to support strong presence of Harappans at Sharisokta, from where this trade originated, and they were acting as an intermediary. Meaning the early Harappans were the traders operating on this land route and procuring this rare commodity directly from the source. When I say this stone is a rare commodity, let me tell you, there are less than a handful deposits of lapis lazuli which are mined in other regions across the world. In the United States, Chile, Siberia, and Myanmar. That's all. These regions were neither connected to the ancient world nor were they a part of this trade network. Mesopotamian archaeology was being studied extensively in the 19th century with particular interest in their script and the massive collection of literary evidence that they had. The Western world seeks its origins from this land, which has also been called the cradle of civilization. Located between the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, it did throw up some impressive monuments and, of course, more importantly, copious amounts of written evidence on different materials, which only compares with Egypt. Unfortunately, in the Harappan civilization, we have very little written evidence which still hasn't been deciphered. Most of the names of countries mentioned on the Mesopotamian steles and cylindrical seals were already deciphered by the researchers by the beginning of the 20th century. Dilmun was identified with the island of Bahrain and Magan was the Oman Peninsula, both located within the Persian Gulf. Archaeological studies in these two Gulf countries progressed along these lines, as well as studies on their local cultures going back into prehistory, especially in the Oman Peninsula. There was a third name mentioned in the Mesopotamian literature which completed this trade network, and for a long time it remained a mystery. That was until the discovery of the Harappan civilization, which was the missing link. There are trade lists given in the Mesopotamian literature which read out almost like a shopping list or perhaps a bill of shipping. As per these lists, of course, Harappan or Meluhan presence could then be identified in Bahrain or Dilmun and the Oman Peninsula or Magan. These four entities are met with in various textual, Mesopotamian of course, as well as archaeological contexts across the region. And together they formed a thriving and successful trade network of the Bronze Age. In my opinion, the European colonial trade, which is the only other global trade known to us, would in fact pale compared to this ancient sea trade. What is surprising is that this entire trade enterprise was set up because Mesopotamia had a huge demand for exotic trade goods, which the Harappans were able to procure for them from the other areas. Apart from lapis lazuli, the other trade items included Omani copper, gold, other semi-precious stones and objects or beads made from these materials like carnelian and agate, microlithic beads which were a Harappan trademark, ivory and shell objects of art, cotton cloth, wooden furniture, and even exotic birds and animals from the Harappan ports. While trade on the earlier land route appears to be somewhat limited, the sea route is certainly extensive in nature. The riverine civilization of Mesopotamia, which was fed by the Tigris and Euphrates, was certainly fertile and rich in agricultural produce. However, they lacked in any kind of mineral resources or riches, if you call it, which the elites and the ruling class demanded as part of their status. And so they imported cedar wood from Lebanon, semi-precious stones from Anatolia or Turkey, copper from the Oman Peninsula or Magan as we know it. These rich deposits of copper from Oman were exported mainly to Mesopotamia, but possibly also to Harappans, especially in Gujarat, as we've seen in Lothal. Lothal in particular has reported copper ingots which matched the chemical components of the Omani copper. As for Harappan exports to Mesopotamia, the list is just too long to present in this particular talk here. It will need its own presentation. Relations between these trading partners of the 3rd millennium BCE sea trade were far from equal. From time to time, these ancient countries took control of the trade, and this can be seen in the archaeological evidence across the entire region. Earliest evidence of this comes from the 6th millennium BCE Ubaid pottery of Mesopotamia, which emerged from Neolithic traditions. These were found in Bahrain and the Oman Peninsula that early. So the presence of Mesopotamians at the copper mines in the Omani mountains strongly suggests that they were extracting the copper ingots there. During this initial period, Mesopotamian sailors were also posted at Dilmun. After that, Bahrain or Dilmun became the center of this trade activity, and we also find Omani habitation in Bahrain. I'd say by this time, the Omanis were extracting copper by themselves and possibly even bringing it to Dilmun. But the Omanis were never present in Mesopotamia. This is also when we begin to see Harappan trade-related material in Bahrain or Dilmun, and to some extent also at a few Mesopotamian port sites. But the Harappans were not present in the Oman Peninsula. I know it gets a little confusing here, the way they kept exchanging roles, taking new roles. Just think of the dynamics that played out between these trading partners during that early period. In the next stage, the Harappans took over the entire sea trade network, and they were suddenly seen everywhere. They were dominating the Persian Gulf and the northern Indian Ocean. This was during the mature Harappan period of 2700 to 1900 BCE. I think it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that it was the sea trade which to a large extent defined their fortune. This is also when we get to see acculturation of the Harappans in the Oman Peninsula. Acculturation means when another country or culture adopts some of your ideas, technology, and assimilates it into their own culture. A few Harappan traders possibly lived in Magan or the Oman Peninsula during this period. This is evidenced by Harappan artifacts found in that area, such as chert weights, which were used for trade, ceramics, sealings, which were the seal stamps applied to certain parcels, possibly, which were all that remained then, really, the sealings. And there's even a burial at Shimal in the UAE, which could possibly be of a Harappan trader. Alongside the skeleton, The excavators also found carnelian beads, a large Harappan pot, and a copper spearhead. Of special interest for acculturation are a couple of Omani seals made with Harappan technology. It's possible that these were actually made by a Harappan trader living over there. The local ceramics also began to show some Harappan styled slips or paint work and designs. Most importantly, the cultural materials were widespread even into the interior sites in the Oman Peninsula, which possibly may or may not have much to do with the trade as well. So this could of course suggest reusing of the Harappan material within the Omani society. Again, it could also suggest trade which reached to the interior sites in the Oman Peninsula. And its dominance of the copper trade at this time also shows that Oman or Magan came under the sphere of influence of the Harappans. Bahrain or Dilmun, on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, had once possibly been colonized by the Mesopotamians, which was right at the beginning of the trade. While Dilmun's trading fortunes fluctuated throughout this trade period, its habitation, as seen from archaeological evidence, has always been dominated by Mesopotamia. In effect, what we're looking at is two giant civilizational states of the Old World, Mesopotamia and Meluha, or the Harappan civilization, with smaller cultures within their own spheres of influence. And as seen earlier, Harappans also dominated the land routes in Central Asia, from where they controlled the trade of lapis lazuli and possibly some other materials as well. So when this sea trade was thriving and so successful right up to 2000 BCE, what happened? Why did it suddenly collapse? And along with it, we also see the collapse of the Harappan civilization, the breakdown of the Mesopotamian civilization, and a complete disappearance of Dilmun, and to a large extent of Magan as well. The entire trade network almost disappeared or disintegrated, or did it? This will be discussed in another presentation. Thank you so much for watching this presentation, and I hope you liked it. If there are any questions in the comment section, I will be answering them on the chat itself. Thank you again. Namaste. If you'd like to watch more such videos, then please consider subscribing to the channel and click on the bell icon.